right, if you would, open up to Psalm 89. Psalm 89. Don't worry, we'll get to 37. We're going to take 2 weeks to go through Psalm 37. But really, before we get to Psalm 37, there's a couple of things that I think will really help us to kind of see Psalm 37 in its rightful place. But looking at Psalm 89, look down at verse 13. It says, "You have a strong arm. Your hand is mighty. Your right hand is exalted. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Loving kindness and truth go before you. How blessed are the people who know the joyful sound. O Lord, they walk in the light of your countenance." When you start just looking through just these 3 verses, what do you recognize about his throne? Established by righteousness and justice. So when you think about here, looking at God the Father sitting on the throne, and his throne is established by means of righteousness and justice. So you can always know that God is going to respond out of what is righteous, and he's always going to respond out of what is just. Now, do we always respond that same way? Are there times where we want justice, the scales of justice, to tip in an extreme fashion, to go against someone that has caused us great difficulty? Or there are other times where we go, well, I kind of like them. I hope that the justice is not too hard or too difficult, and we want it to lighten up. Realize, God does not work off of any favoritism. He says, my throne's established by righteousness and justice. Now, it talks about 13, he says, you have a strong arm, your hand is mighty, your right hand is exalted. Now, flash forward to New Covenant. Who sits at God's right hand? Jesus does. Has Jesus not been exalted and lifted high? Then if you look at verse 15, how blessed are the people who know the joyful sound. O Lord, they walk in the light of your countenance. He says, God, just being in your presence lightens us up. The light of his countenance. And if you notice, kind of sandwiched in between there in verse 14, he says, loving kindness and truth go before you. He says, loving kindness about covenant love, God keeps his promises, and it's always based around truth. Now, look just a little bit further over. Look at Psalm 97. You might feel like you're reading something very similar. Psalm 97, look at the first 3 verses. The Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice. Let the many islands be glad. Why should there be a great rejoicing since the Lord reigns? Why? Righteousness, justice, truth, loving kindness. Is that the way you think about God in the Old Testament, sitting on his throne, and to think in your head, boy, let the earth rejoice? Because it's always going to be based on justice and righteousness. Then to think, New Covenant, who reigns now? Jesus the King says now he reigns according to the same things, righteousness and justice. You can read more about that in Hebrews chapter 1. But notice how he continues here. He says, let the many islands be glad. To me, that's just kind of a unique little thought. Like, even if you live in the smallest little low place, man, you should still rejoice because he reigns. Then, verse 2, this is going to sound familiar. Clouds and thick darkness surround him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Why the repetitiveness? Whenever you hear things being repeated, how do you consider that? Important? You see things being emphasized to know it's not just a little bit. Matt?
I think these are things that when you meditate on something that's important to you in your relationship with God, these are meditations that would come up time and time again, like reminders.
Those repetitions, those reminders of these things over and over again. Now, I want you to think about righteousness and justice. If you are guilty, how do righteousness and justice sound? Scary, bad, intimidating? If you do what is holy or what is good, how do righteousness and justice sound? Sounds good. Sounds fantastic, right? Even comforting. You notice God's not being any different. Who's being different? We are. Now, notice even the next statement, verse 3. He says, fire goes before him and burns up his adversaries round about. Well, which side are they falling on? Evil, wickedness. And you notice, what does he bring about? Righteousness and justice, right? So, you see these principles continue on. Look a little bit further. Look over at Psalm 99. Verse 1. The Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. He is enthroned above the cherubim, let the earth shake. What's being brought across here? The Lord reigns. Should there be a response from us? What's the response he mentions? Trembling, shaking, having fear. Since the Lord reigns, it should change who we are and how we go about things, right? Then he continues, verse 2, the Lord is great in Zion, and his name is awesome. Is that the way we think about him? Then, of course, he emphasizes here, he says, praise your great and awesome name, holy is he. Verse 4, the strength of the king loves. We're right back to it again, aren't we? He says, this is the strength of the king. If you think in terms of maybe Old Testament kings, like maybe even King David, he'd be a great one to think of. What made David feared when he did what was right? What did people know? He's righteous and he's going to be just. If you're going to go against what's right, what's going to come? It's going to bring the sword, right? Now, he says, the strength of the king loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. You see these same things again, justice and righteousness. Lord sits on is enthroned. His throne is established upon these things, justice and righteousness. He says he has established equity, because that's what justice and righteousness does. Because what happens, maybe even take it this way, what happens in the home whenever parents don't work off of what's just? What happens if they go, you know what, oh, just whatever they want to do is fine? Chaos, right? And you realize, boy, no wonder he starts to talk about this brings about equity, equality, to go. Because can you really find equality when there's no righteousness and justice? You can't, can you? Now, he continues, look at verse 5. He says, exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. Holy is he. Holy. This is what holiness looks like. Now, seeing these things together, I want you to go back to Proverbs. Look at Proverbs chapter 24. Proverbs 24, look down at verse 17. These 4 verses are really a warning. And of course, Solomon writes Proverbs in general. Verse 17, do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles. Or the Lord will see it and be displeased and turn his anger away from him. What's the typical response whenever your enemy fails? Happy, rejoice, laugh, mock at them. Yeah, we beat them. He says, don't rejoice when your enemy falls. Don't let your heart be glad when he stumbles. Is that justice? Is it righteousness whenever you laugh and mock at the enemy whenever he fails? Now, then he comes to verse 18. He says, oh, the Lord will see it and be displeased and turn his anger away from him. He says, you're focusing on the wrong things. What's God's focus in humanity? What's he desire? That all would come to the Lord. That all would be saved. Here's the statement. He says, you go around and you laugh and you mock whenever your enemy fails. He says, just know I'm not going to give everything to them. Then he turns it around, verse 19. Here's another thought that goes with it. Do not fret because of evildoers, or be envious of the wicked, for there will be no future for the evil man. The lamp of the wicked will be put out. Why is there no future for the evil man? What do you know about God's throne? It's just. So whenever evil men are going, whenever wicked men are going, he says, don't fret because of evildoers. Now, typically, and we're going to have to be careful here because I think I know what we do naturally. When we use the word fret, what kind of words do we think of? Worry is usually the first word that we think of. But you need to know this. In the Hebrew language, this word fret is not about worry. It's about something different. It's about anger. It's about, let me make sure I get everything right, to burn in anger, to seek to devour. It can even carry with it emotional strain. But yet, it's really not the term worry, even though that's where we naturally go because of the English language. And I think you'll see that as we go through Psalm 37. So when he says, do not fret because of evildoers or be envious of the wicked, he says, for there will be no future for the evil man. The lamp of the wicked will be put out, because you know that God's throne is established upon righteousness and justice. That's why you don't have to let your anger get all carried away when you see evil people strive. Because typically when we see evil people doing things and getting away with things, whenever you see them succeed in life, how easy is it to become very angry? God, why would you allow this to happen? Why would you let these men get away with these things? Why do you let them continue to be leaders? We have those kind of responses, don't we? Now, notice Solomon says, do not fret because of evildoers. Don't be envious of the wicked. You're going to hear some parallels. Now, all right, welcome to Psalm 37. I know you were wondering. The reason we've gone through the 3 different Psalms we've touched already is because we need to know that God's throne is established and based upon righteousness and justice, and that He is to be feared and trembled. You don't have to be worried. You don't have to fret. You don't have to get angry whenever evil people look like they're succeeding. Now, Psalm 37, verse 1. Do not fret because of evildoers. Be not envious toward wrongdoers. Have you ever been envious of someone who does wrong? Has that ever happened? Typically, what's it based around?
They're receiving things that we don't have.
They're receiving something that we don't have or don't get. And we start thinking, this is not fair. This is not right. This is not just. And typically when people see injustice, what happens next? Anger. Now, what is David pointing to? Do not fret. It's not about worry. It's about anger. He says, don't get angry because of evildoers. He says, be not envious toward wrongdoers. Because when you start to see, and realize how impactful this is, when you start to see people who do evil and do wrong and you feel like they're being favored, if you're weak in the faith, what does it make you want to do? Be like them. You go, well, maybe it would be better if I didn't try to do it God's way. So can this turn into a big problem? Can it even cost you your soul if you don't deal with it? Certainly. Look at verse 2. He says, for they will wither quickly like the grass and fade like the green herb. All right. We've had a lot of warm weather lately. How's your grass looking? How long did it take to wither? Didn't take long, did it? He says, do you realize that wicked, evil people have no way of sustaining themselves? He says, they're going to be taken away quickly. He says, and why is that going to happen? What do you know about God's throne? It's established on justice and righteousness. He's not going to allow it to endure forever. He says, it will be dealt with. He says, and fade like the green herb, verse 3. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. See, when you start to envy evildoers, what starts to tail off? Your spiritual side. And now, all of a sudden, we go, I don't know that I trust God. There have been people in my life who've done wrong things, and I don't see that it's been dealt with. And you go, why do I keep on doing good if this is what happens? And you realize, no wonder he brings it up. Trust in the Lord and do good. If you know that his throne's established on righteousness and justice, then what do you know you have to pursue? Righteousness and justice. And I got to make sure I'm doing what's actually good. Not good in the sight of men, but what's good before God. Then, he says, dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. He says, you're going to dwell well. Verse 4, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Now, you think that gets quoted a lot? Which part of that do you think gets quoted more than the other? Oh, he'll give you the delights of your heart. But it's the first part of the verse that gives it equality, isn't it? He says, you delight yourself in the Lord. He says, you make the Lord your delight. Which if he's your delight, what two things are you going to be going after? Righteousness and justice. And will you trust God? Will you do what is good? Will you stay away from envying wrongdoers? He says, you delight in the Lord, and how's the Lord going to respond out of his righteousness? This is a promise. What does he promise? He'll give you the desires of your heart. Now, put those two pieces together. When you delight yourself in the Lord, he's going to give you the desires of your heart. Now, you tell me, what will your desires be that he will grant? Things that are good, things of the Lord. Think about maybe the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. If you delight in the Lord, how much do you desire those types of things? And whenever you go after them, what is God promising that he will do? You delight in me, and I will give you the desires of your heart. It's the spiritual things, right? Yet so often people take this verse and they don't apply it to spiritual things. What do they apply it to? Physical. You know, it's like, okay, we're going to pray before the ball game. Oh, what's this all about? Is that what God's concerned about? Oh, but I delight in the Lord. You go, hey, we're looking at the spiritual side of things. Eric.
Carey, remind me of 8:24. God causes all things to come out for good to those who trust Him and causes according to His purpose.
Right. Think about Romans 8, where he talks about, God works all things together for good to those who love God and are called according to His purpose. And you go, oh, you mean you're going to delight in the Lord? He says, I'm going to work it together for good, even through difficulty. You'll be able to see what I'm doing by the end. Then he comes together here. He says, delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. Verse 5, commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in Him, and He will do it. Isn't that an interesting promise? He says, the question is, are you really committed to delighting yourself in the Lord? When you think about somebody who is committed, not being committed, but committed. Just a quick illustration. Thomas Edison was committed to finding a little filament that he could put inside of a bulb that whenever it had electricity running through it, it would give light. You have any idea how many different filaments Edison tried? Thousands. Some of them worked. Some of them worked better than others. And you think about going through, and some people claim there's like 10,000, but that's probably not true. I mean, even just trying 1,700, lighting them, seeing how long they light, how efficient they are. Why did he try so hard? Is reading a book at night that important? You see commitment. Did commitment come with a lot of failures for Edison? Certainly. And yet you see the commitment continue to strive forward. Now, here's the other side of this. That's just a physical illustration. What about on the spiritual side? I mean, if you want to guess a number, how many times we failed, I'll let you guess your own number. But to go, do we let the failures take us to where we go, you know what, I'm not committed anymore? And notice what it takes you away from. He says, commit your way to the Lord. Now what are we really talking about? Your way, how you go about things. He says, commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in Him, and He will do it. Think about that. You mean, if I delight in the Lord and I want my faith to be refined through trials, and I take the right attitudes, and I'm looking to Him, you mean He'll sustain me through the trial? Because that's my desire, is to grow in perseverance, to have endurance, for my faith to be refined. You mean that's when God will grant that? He will do it. Do you trust Him that He will? There's the question. Then, verse 6. He says, He will bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your judgment as the noonday. He says, notice what's going to be really brought to light. Your righteousness. Let's see. His throne's established by justice and righteousness, right? If you're wondering why I used Edison, here you know why. Because notice it brings righteousness to light. Because now I trust Him, I'm going to let it affect what I do, and I'm going to trust that He's going to bring about the desires that I have of the Lord. Because they're spiritually given and appraised. Now, he continues, says, and your judgment as the noonday. Oh, you mean judgment? If I'm walking in righteousness, what kind of judgment are we talking about? What's going to happen to the enemies? Will they meet judgment? Did Goliath meet judgment? Yeah, and it only took a small stone. Realize, did Saul, was he dealt with in righteousness? Did David have to take Saul's life? Nope. David desired the things of God. How many times did he have to say to his own soldiers, we can't do this to the Lord's anointed? He's the anointed king. There's a way we're supposed to respond. God will take care of him. If he deserves justice, if he deserves a judgment, God will take care of that. Is that the way we respond when we see evildoers, wrongdoers, just seemingly moseying on through the good days? He says, you know what? The Lord's going to take care of them. He says, I don't have to get angry about it. I don't have to be concerned about trying to work out my own justice. He says, I'll just let him take care of that. Now, there are times to engage and have a conversation, but to go, you know what? I don't have to fret over it. Verse 7. Look at where it brings you. Because there's something, when you get all angry about a situation, you're not going to have what he mentions here in verse 7. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Whenever you're all angry, is it easy to rest? No. You ever been so angry at night you couldn't even go to sleep? Be still. Now, whenever you take that in, sometimes we get so riled up that sleep just evades us. It's not an evasion. And don't think that if you can't sleep at night that it's all because of this. But you go, whenever anger is at the heart of it, he says, you need to learn to rest in the Lord. You need to trust the Lord. He says, remember, his throne is established on righteousness and justice. He says, wait patiently for him. That easy? Do we have our ideas of timing? Yeah, we want it. Oh, I see you've thought about this before. Now. We want it now. We don't want to wait. We don't want to be patient. He said, no, don't kill him. I know we could easily take his life. He's right here in the cave with us. He says, I know he's in a deep sleep. We cut off his head right here and around the field. He says, no, let's just patiently wait. He doesn't use those words, but that's what he does. Do we need to recognize what patience really is? You think about, you know what? These folks are doing things in an evil, underhanded, deceitful way, and somebody's got to say something. What's that motivated by? Anger, rage. Time for me to take justice. Oh, you really want to do that? There's somebody who really deals with justice. We might find ourselves in the wrong place. Now, he says at the end of 7, he says, do not fret because of him who prospers in his way, because of the man who carries out wicked schemes. He says, don't let that get you all riled up. Now, I'm going to take the step into this deep hole. You ever see people get all fired up about politics? Do they fret about it? Do they get angry because look at what they're doing? I can't believe they'd be so. What's wisdom? Do not fret. Who sits on the throne? Jesus does now. In Psalm 37, you're talking about God the Father sitting on the throne. He says, do we realize that he reigns? Why do we get sucked in to the world's thinking? Why do we get sucked in to the big rivalries and rallies around all these other aspects of going, we're not talking about justice and righteousness anymore. So what he lays out here, verse 8, and this tells you what, in case you're wondering, well, how does he really know fret's not about worry? I don't know any Hebrew. Well, just look at verse 8. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it leads only to evil doing. What's David's instruction? He says, you better stop anger. Anger's the inside. What's the other part? Wrath. Where does it go? Wrath's not internal. When anger boils, next comes wrath. Now, he says, you cease from anger and forsake wrath. He says, do not fret. Because if you let yourself stay all riled up in anger, where is the only direction it will lead you? Evil doing. It won't take you to righteousness. Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, isn't there a New Testament verse that talks kind of about this? Well, look over at James chapter 1. I'm sure you're already thinking about it in your head, but let's take a look at it. James chapter 1. You'll see a good remedy here through Christ. James 1:19. He says, this you know, my beloved brethren. Isn't it interesting? James doesn't say, I got a new idea for you. He says, now this you know, but maybe you have forgotten. He says, but everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Whenever you're angry, how good of a listener are you? I want you to think about how we process things. Whenever you're angry about something and somebody's talking to you, you're just listening for something that they can say that you take to a far-reaching illustration to show how stupid they are and how you don't make any sense. Instead of being a listener to go, where are they coming from on this? And actually hear it. He says, hold back your words. You'll be glad you kept them back. He says, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Here's the reason why, verse 20. He says, for the anger of man does not achieve the righteousness of God. He says, your anger is not going to take you in a spiritual direction. Right? So, is that the way we see anger? Do we think of anger as really being that poisonous to us? Or have we just had it so long that we kind of got used to it? Now, he makes a statement here, for the anger of man. Now, is that different than the anger of God? Yes, because the anger of man is based on what? Self. He says the anger of man does not elevate itself to the righteousness of God, which is exactly what his throne is founded on. Now, come back over to Ephesians chapter 4. Look at verses 26 and 27. He says, be angry and yet do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Should self-control be part of our anger? Notice he doesn't say, oh, if you're angry, then you've already sinned. He doesn't say that. He says, be angry, but you've got to make sure you can control your anger. Remember the fruit of the Spirit? Love, joy, peace, patience. Patience? Self-control. Oh, you mean I'm going to have to walk by the Spirit to have self-control whenever I get angry? Now, here's the other aspect of this. He says, do not let the sun go down on your anger. You ever stewed on something? I mean, it really got to you. And you probably didn't sleep real well that night either, did you? There was. And notice, it just stays there. And I want you to see who you're opening the door for. Because look at verse 27. He says, and do not give the devil an opportunity. What's the devil really looking for? You just stay camped on anger.
Looking for a place to get in.
He says, that's an easy place for me to get. I can let you work off of anger, I'll really pull it. Now, I want you to think, Jesus ever get angry? You realize, are there times where he gets indignant? And if you think back through those stories, is he working off of self? What's he working off of? Righteousness and justice. Because is there a time for things to be dealt with? Yes. There are times where righteousness comes down and justice comes down. Now, come back over to Psalm 37. So whatever you look here in verse 8, cease from anger, forsake wrath, turn away from it, leave it in the dust. He says, do not fret, it leads only to evil doing. Do you know why it only leads to evil doing? Because who are you opening the door for? The devil. He doesn't want us to succeed. He wants to say, you know what? I really want to tempt you. You get angry, and then you throw a fit, and then I'll see if I can't get you a raise. Because, oh, you stood up for what you believed in. Oh, you mean I get rewarded for being evil? You see the temptation? He's not content with you just being angry. He says, let me try to reward you for your anger. Let me draw you in when you should have had self-control. Now, verse 9. He says, for evildoers will be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord, they will inherit the land. Is justice coming? What's going to happen to evildoers? They'll be cut off. What if we're the evildoers? We'll be cut off. Now, you notice it as he continues, verse 10. Yet a little while and the wicked man will be no more, and you will look carefully for his place, and he will not be there. Remember what he said earlier? This is like the grass. It's going to wither. He says, you realize that they're not going to last as long as you think. Then, verse 11, but the humble will inherit the land and will delight themselves in abundant prosperity. He says, is it different for the humble? You ever seen a humble person in a disagreement with somebody who's full of rage and anger? You ever experienced that? A humble person is usually quiet. They usually don't say as much. They let the other person continue. They show patience. And then whenever they finally get quiet enough, they'll use a gentle, soft word. Do you remember what gentle and soft words do? They turn away wrath. And then you get to find out, is there really an opportunity here or not? Now, you look at this, and he says, you know what's going to happen with the humble? He says they're going to inherit the land. Now, in David's day and time, what was that really talking to? Land of Canaan, the promised land? What about for us? We're talking about a heavenly home. Now, he continues, says, and will delight themselves in abundant prosperity. You think that's really about physical things? I mean, is God going to take care of us physically? Do we know that? Yeah, we know he will. It's interesting. He promises, if you seek first my kingdom and my... let's see, what's this throne based on again? He says, I'll add all these things unto you. Once again, same principles. Here's the reasons why. He continues on. Verse 12. The wicked plots against the righteous and gnashes at him with his teeth. Who are you thinking of? Pharisees gnash their teeth against Jesus. He says, you think about wicked people coming against David. You just see it over and over again, don't you? Righteous people. Maybe even think we've been going through Thessalonians on Sunday mornings. You go, you know what? Here's the Jews of faith that come to the Lord, and then there's the Jews who are full of pride. They get really angry. Then they try to kill Paul and Timothy and Silas. You go, oh, they gnash their teeth at the righteous. He says, here's the response, verse 13. What does the Lord do? Laughs at him. Why? Their day's coming. You notice, it doesn't say the Lord mocks them. It just says he laughs at them. Yeah, you make all these promises. It's not going to work out that way. The Lord sits on his throne. Whenever we encounter evildoers, can we have enough trust in the Lord to go, he's going to take care of this? And it's going to be justice, and it's going to be righteousness. Now, it doesn't mean that we sit in the corner and cower, because there's a trust aspect of going, yeah, you know, if somebody asks me to bear witness of something, I'm going to tell the truth. If that's what I'm called to do, I'll do that. But I'm not the one who's leading the spearhead group for them to go down. I'm not the one who's rallying the mob to go out and take them down. He says, I'll let the Lord take care of them. He can affect them much deeper than I ever could, than we ever could. He says, the Lord laughs at him. He says, his day is coming, verse 14. The wicked have drawn the sword and bent their bow to cast down the afflicted and the needy, to slay those who are upright in conduct. Are they ready to destroy? Sword drawn, bow bent, arrow aimed. Sometimes that's us that the target's on. And then you have to go, I trust the Lord. I'll let him take care of me. Now, I want you to realize, there are times, think back even in David's life, was Uriah a righteous man? Have you thought about Uriah? He's a righteous man. Did the Lord take care of Uriah? I want you to think about it. Physically, did the Lord spare Uriah's life? No. Spiritually, did God take care of Uriah? Yes. He continued to do what was righteous and right, even whenever he's brought home from the battlefield. He's not going to go after what's evil. He's like, I can't go down to my house. He says, the ark doesn't have a place to dwell. He says, those who are out there in the fields don't get to go home that are fighting. Do you see him working off of equity? And it gets so bad. Uriah is so righteous that what does David have to try and do? Man, maybe I can get him drunk, and then maybe he won't think so clearly and so righteously. He goes, whose arrow and sword were against Uriah? David. See, David had been on both sides of this. He had known what it was what it was like to be wrong. And to see Uriah never had to find out what his wife had done to him. He gets spared. We typically don't think of someone's physical death as being spared, but we need to learn that. There are times where the righteous die and nobody's learning a lesson because they're not delighting in the Lord. Now, he makes the statement, verse 15. He says, their sword and their bows will be broken. He says, it's going to cost you. Did it cost David? Yeah. When he was the one who was pursuing Uriah, it cost him greatly. Whenever Saul was pursuing David by the sword, how does Saul die? By his own sword in battle, after being shot through with an arrow. Realize, what about those who crucified Jesus? What did they meet up with? Man, they get pierced to the heart, right? The guilt, convicting. Realize, is anybody getting away with anything? No. Because you realize his throne is established on righteousness and justice. You can let go of anger. It is not your friend. He says, fretting only leads to evil. Cease from anger, forsake wrath. Now, Lord willing, next week we'll come back and we'll start in verse 16 and finish on out. All right, have a good week.